welcome to part 3 of our Coastal Homewares shop project. A huge thank you to Kathleen Cryer, who actually identified the doll's house, and it's actually part of the Honeychurch range of doll's houses. So as soon as she put that comment in, I went online and did a Google search for Honeychurch, and it is indeed Honeychurch. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for identifying it. And I think now we actually know the name of it, it would be really nice to use the word Honeychurch either as the street name, because I want to have sort of like a little street plaque on the side there, so we could call it Honeychurch Street. Or if you remember, I spoke about having the advertisements on the sides, so maybe we could use Honeychurch in one of those. And one I thought of was perhaps Honeychurch Haberdashery, wools, yarns, cottons and fabric, and we'll do like a little logo for that. So like I say, when Kathleen gave me that Honeychurch name, I went immediately to Google and did a bit of research, and let me show you what I found. So I did a Google search for Honeychurch Doll's House shop, and I didn't have to scroll down very far before I found it. There it is. And it goes to a website called worthpoint.com. And there it is. So I managed to save one image, which was this first one, but then it doesn't allow you to right click on any of the other images. But just having a flick through. And that's interesting because I couldn't work out how those stairs went, but that separate sort of bit there goes across the front, and I really wouldn't have thought of putting it there. Although I probably won't be using these pieces. I like to build my own banister rails and guard up there. And it's also got internal doors, and the one my uncle gave me never came with those doors, and the little door surrounds weren't included either. But we won't be having doors there anyway, they'll just sort of be open entryways into the main shop. But we might build some sort of little surround on there. The final picture there. And the thing that I find really interesting is I'd spoken about the roof and how I didn't think it looked quite right, but now I've actually seen how it should have been with this plinth across the front. I actually quite like the roof, and I see now how it's actually supposed to look. So I'll make something similar to that, and that also explains why the front door didn't actually look right when it was in place, why there was so much space at the top there. So that will cover that top part of the top floor as well. So yeah, I really like seeing it like this. So thanks again, Kathleen, for pointing that out. And I really like the name Honeychurch as well. And even here in the bare wood, I don't think the doors and windows look too bad. I think it was how they'd sort of painted them in the white, then with that really bright green, if you remember, these sort of little front bits and the doors. It sort of stood out a bit too much and made it look more like a toy than a scale model. So the write-up here says an 18th century shop by Honeychurch, and it's made from good quality solid birch plywood. So that's good to know as well. I knew it was a plywood, but I wouldn't have guessed that it was birch. Okay, so we better get on with some work. Now you'll have noticed that the door is off, and that's because it's on my workbench ready to do some work on. So let's get started. So today I want to make a start on actually framing out the windows so that I can add the beading, which we will then attach the acetate to. But if I can just zoom in on a corner there, I hope you can pick that up on camera, but it's not actually square, it's actually rounded off, and I'm not going to be able to attach my strip in there. So I'm going to need to square off the corners, and I've been having a practice over here so I could choose the best pin file, and it really does work well with a square pin file. So I'm going to be using that one. And just going into each corner of each window. You might be able to see better along that bottom one, it's really rounded in there, and that is actually the wood. It's not just congealed paint. So I'll be doing these top 3, the doors as well at the top there and at the bottom, actually looking at it. In here, in the main windows, the acetate will be sitting along this front panel and sort of sandwiched in there, although I still might have a go at just squaring them off just to make it look a little bit nicer. The same in the door there, we've got a rounded door, so we'll do that as well. Okay, so let me get the camera into a good position and we'll make a start. Okay, so I'm just putting the square pin file right into the corner there at the edge of the window and then just sanding. And I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on that because I want it to stay right into that corner so that I get a lovely square finish, and I don't want to make any ridges anywhere else along the top of this window frame, so I'm pushing it right into the corner as I sand. So I'll do that in each of the window openings, and then what we'll do is we'll go along the outside edges and sand, just using sandpaper and a block just to get that even smoother. I've already given it a sort of preliminary sand when I've sort of first removed the windows, and you can see there where the sort of strip wood was, but we will give it a really good sand before we attach the strip wood. Okay, so that's now all of the windows done, so they've all now got nice square corners, and that probably took me a good half an hour or so. And my advice would be just to make sure that you've always got your pin file right into the corner, especially as your arm begins to tire. You might find that you're sort of moving slightly along the window frame, so just make sure that you're always butted right up into the corner. And also, with these doors I started going in from front to back, but always work from back to front, and that way if you make any little chips or anything, it's not going to be on the front of the build. But otherwise, not too bad. Okay, let me tidy up the dust and then we can move on. So what I want to do next is start sanding inside the actual window recess. Now I've got this little sanding block here. It's not really working as a sanding block anymore because I've had it for quite a while and the sandpaper has worn down quite a bit. But I'm going to wrap some sandpaper around it, and this is a nicer size. I've got a larger block, but that's not going to fit inside of the windows. So this is quite a nice size for that. And I'm using a 180 grit sandpaper. Okay, so I've also sanded inside each of the window recesses now. I haven't completely removed the paint, but if I run my finger down, I've got a nice smooth surface in there now. And one thing I found really helpful, and it's easier if you've got a piece like this that is loose, keep turning it around so that you're always sort of sanding downwards like that, and you'll get a better finish, and it's also easier to do. And I also sanded along the sort of area here where we'll be having the shop sign, and I thought I'd be able to sand out, I don't know if you can see that on camera actually, can you see that sort of little round indentation there? It's like a little circle, as if something's been either leaning on it or stuck there or something. And then at the other end I've got these little, well, it's like a little indentation and then these little marks. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this sanding dust, and then I'm going to use some fine filler on those, see if we can get rid of them. And I'm going to be using this Ronseal smooth finish filler. And you might have heard me talk about this before. I really like to use this for doll's house furniture because it's so fine. It really does fill tiny cracks, so it's a really good one to use for this sort of thing. So let me get tidy and then we'll have a go at that. Okay, so I just took the whole door and cutting mat outside and brushed off all the dust using my soft brush. And I've cleaned my whole work area down using warm water and kitchen towel. And now I'm going to have a go at the filling. And you can actually see what I mean a bit better from this angle. See that circle there? So I'm not sure what's happened there, but let's see if we can just cover that up a bit. So I'm just scraping it on. And it is filling it actually, because it's making a little white circle there. So that's good. But I just want to put it over like that quite thickly. And I know you would have all done filling in your time. But the key is to get a layer on and then leave it, rather than doing what I'm doing. keep rubbing it, because you're just then pulling off what you've put on. But I just want to get an even coverage over that area. I seem to be pulling it all off. Put a bit more on. I've probably got a bit too much there, that's what it is. Let me wipe some of that off. There, that's quite a good coverage there. And then once that's completely dry, we can sand that back, and hopefully we won't be able to see that little circle. So let's go and have a look at the other end now. And that's just those two strange little marks there. Actually, I think I can see a bit of a circle there as well. I wonder if it was something that was leaning against it. Quite strange. And this whole end actually tilts down, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do anything about that. I'm sorry. It's not too bad or too noticeable. And I will sort of put things that you really can't do anything about down to the fact that it's an old building, and it just adds realism. So we'll say that if we can't get this completely straight. And this time I don't think I've got quite enough there, so let me grab a little bit more. I'll just try and smooth that along that end. It just goes down at a little bit of an angle. I'm just trying to cover it completely. Again, hopefully we'll just be able to sand it flat. But either way, that will cover up those two little marks and that circle. And I've always had really good results with this filler. There. So it's 1:10 now, so perfect time to stop for lunch, and then we'll come back and have a look at this later on this afternoon. The filler is now completely dry, and I'm actually going to sand this off outside just because it creates so much dust. Okay, so again for this I'm going to be using the 180 grade sandpaper and my small sanding block. Start at this end. So though that's sanded back quite nicely, I can still see that circle there, but if I run my finger over it, it's completely smooth. So hopefully when we apply the paint, that won't be too noticeable. Okay, so let's have a go at the other end. I actually put it on a lot thicker at this end to try and get rid of that slope in the wood. So this is going to take a little bit more sanding. So that end as well has sanded down quite nicely. And it's actually gotten rid of that tilt in the wood, so that's now straight flush along there. So I'll go and get my brush and dust off all the dust, and then we can get this back inside. So we're now ready to actually start constructing the window frames. and I'm actually going to construct them in place. So I'm going to put a bit of beading around the outside, and then I'll add the window panes actually in situ rather than building the frame and then putting the whole thing in, because that way you get a more exact fit. And to create the frames, I'll be using 3x3 strip, that's 1/8 of an inch strip. And then for the doors, we'll need to use something a little bit thicker. So these are 9mm deep, these white frames. So I haven't got any 9x3 strips, so I'll probably have to create a piece using a piece of 6x3 and 3x3. But we really only need a piece of that across there and across there, so that we've got somewhere to put the pin hinge for the top of the door, and the bottom hinge will just go straight into the wood at the bottom there, so that's fine. And I've actually done a rough sketch just to show you how I want the front of the shop to look, so let's have a look at that first. One of my wonderfully technical scale drawings here. Okay, so in the top we're just going to keep it really simple, so we'll do a line of beading around the outside and then just do a piece of strip across there and 2 pane divides down there. Same there and in the smaller landing window. The large windows I just want to keep clear, so we'll just have one large piece of acetate in there. Firstly, so that we can see into the shop, and so that we've got room down here to create a little window display. I think if we put frames in there as well, we're going to block the view into the shop. And I think that's going to be really nice, being able to see in some of the display, so I want to keep that clear. Moving across to the door, we'll copy this panelling that we've got on the window surrounds, and that will be level with those. And then a big sort of acetate panel here, again, so you can see into the shop there. And then up here, I talked about doing some stained glass. I've actually had an idea, just to make that a little bit more simple, is to do some painting onto acetate. So I'm going to have a play around with that. And I know that you can get the paints for model cars, which are clear paints, which you would use for the indicators and things like that. So I'm just trying to find a supplier to find some different colours. And I just want to, again, keep it really simple, just do a little boat on there with a couple of blue sails or something. Same with the second window, and then the sort of main street door will just be a traditional panel door. Again, we'll have acetate at the top here, and I'm actually going to use vinyl to create the street number there. So we'll do a couple of vinyl letters in gold, which will match our shop name, which will be along here, and which you're going to help me choose. Okay, so let's get back to the shop front. And this is when having that extra workspace really does come in handy. So I can do all my measuring over here on my main desk, and then I can do my cutting over there. Sorry if I was making you dizzy then, swinging about. So I've just popped the shop down on the floor for now. And I've just changed my little shed over as well. So I've had my potting shed there for a while. So I've just put my messy shed up there. Let's just take that acetate out so you can get a better look inside. And I'm sure you've seen this over on YouTube. This was a series I did over there, so how to actually build the shed, and then I did videos for all the little accessories to go inside, and I loved doing this. And I really do love creating messy scenes, because you can just pack everything in. You haven't got to worry about it looking over full. But I don't know about you, but I just really love having one of my projects close by when I'm working. I just find it really sort of motivating to think eventually our shop is going to be complete. So I'm going to start with this small window, and I'm going to start by measuring the sides. So that's 77, and let's just measure that end, 77 as well, so it's completely square, which is good. And let me just bring you in a little bit. So the strip wood that's been used for the external part of the frame is 3mm thick. and I want to put my bead in just on the inside of that, so actually onto the main wood that makes up the shop front, so it will sit just below that external frame and will look like an opening window frame once it's constructed. So that's the idea. Okay, so I need to start by cutting 2 pieces at 77mm long, and that's just over 3 inches. And I'm using my mitre block and saw just because although the handheld guillotine is easier to use, sometimes when you make the cut it can just very slightly round over the end of the strip, and I need these to be completely square, otherwise our window frame is going to look gappy. Now with some projects that's okay to get that rounded end if you were making legs, for example, because chances are you'll be sanding the legs at the end anyway to make the piece balance. But with something like this where you need to be really precise, then the mitre block and saw is probably the better choice. Now I don't think I'm in the right position here at all. This is a block that's designed to sit over the edge of a desk, so I'm just propping it up on this eraser just so that I can film, but I'm not sure I'm in the right position, because I just wanted to talk to you about where to position the blade, which I'm sure you know. I know you're all experienced miniaturists. But just as a tip, I always like to saw just above my little pencil line so that I'm adding onto the length rather than taking away, because then you can always just trim a piece off with your craft knife. But if you cut it too short, again, you're going to have gaps in your frame. Let me put that pencil down so I don't drop it again. So the blade I'm positioning just in front of that pencil line so I can see the pencil line on the left hand side of it. And I still think I'm in the wrong position. I don't want to keep moving you around today. I feel like I'm going to make you dizzy. So just a nice gentle smooth cut, and we've got a little bit of a fluffy end there, and I always use my craft knife to trim that off rather than sanding. I'm sure you know this from watching the tutorials, but sanding will take away from the length. But just trimming it off with a craft knife like that, you're not actually touching the strip, you're just removing those little fluffy ends. Okay, so let's measure up for the second piece. And it is actually something I think of when I'm doing tutorials, is firstly whether I repeat myself too much, keep telling you the same things over and over. And the other thing is if I sound a bit condescending, and I don't mean to at all. I know you're all experienced in what you do, and you can probably give me advice and tips on certain things as well. But it's just that I like to explain things how I like things explained to me, and that's in layman's terms. So that's why I always do it like that, I suppose. But please don't ever be offended if you think I'm, telling you things that you already know. It's actually so warm today. I think it's just midday actually, and I think we're over 30 degrees now. But this glue, every time I go to open the lid, it's dried and stuck just because it's so warm and clammy in here. Now, I've checked the weather on my phone, and it says there's going to be storms by 3 o'clock, so I'll probably still be filming at 3, so hopefully we'll be able to see those storms come in together. Okay, so I've got my glue here, and I'm just going to begin by attaching the first strip. And I've made sure my inside of my windows is completely dust free. And I've got that lovely line there to position it against. I'm just going to slot that below that piece of strip. Let me just come and have a look from the other angle. Make sure that I'm straight all the way along, and you've got time to manoeuvre before the glue begins to dry. That's another thing I'm always saying. And I'm checking along the line at the top there as well. So that is now nice and straight. And I'm just going to press that into place and put the other one into place, and then I'm going to put some masking tape around the actual edge of the shop. Let me just move that over a little bit. Let's come in and do the other one. That one will go in there. And it's a bit of a tight fit at that end, not because of the size, but because of a little bit of paint that's sticking up down there still. But I don't mind them being tight. I think it's better that they're tight than too loose. And the other thing you can do is actually bring in some spare pieces of stripwood and just use them to really push those attached strips into the corners and press it down all the way along. I find that that just puts a little bit more pressure on than just doing it with your fingers. Okay, so let me grab some tape. So I just had to take that little screw out of the end there, and that was the little door latch, if you remember, so that I can stand this up on my desk, and then I can get in there with the masking tape and really pull that over the edges like that to really pull that strip down. The whole door nearly tipped up then. And I've cut myself some masking tape here, and even this is curling up in the heat. It's so awful. I mean, I do like a nice sunny day. I don't like rain, but this heat is just unbearable. I think last year when it was hot, or the year before when we had that really hot year, I seemed to be able to bear it a bit better, so I don't know if it's an age thing, where you sort of feel the heat more. But I am finding it really hard this year. I'm just so lucky that I'm working at home and not sat in a stuffy old office anymore. There as well. Pulling it really tightly, so that's really pulling that stripwood against the edge of the frame. Holding it into place at the back as well so it doesn't ping off. And then I want to do the same with the next windows up here, so do these vertical strips on each one, and then we'll work on the horizontal strips. So these ones are 116, again 116. That's just over 4.5 inches. And I thought they might be the same, but the end ones are actually 115.5 and 116. So for some reason we've got a little bit of a shorter frame there. Let me just remeasure. Yeah, it's just under 116, but that's okay. So you just cut your strip to those exact measurements, and because it's only out by such a tiny amount, we should still look square when we're actually looking at it from the front, so I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so I've got 3 116s and 1 115.5. So that's the vertical frames now in place along the top there. So I'm now going to leave those to dry, and whilst they're drying we'll make a start on the doors. Okay, so we're going to start with the shop door, and to get the height I've just been and measured the height of my doll's house front door, and that measures 167 millimetres, and let me give you that in inches. 6 and 19/32 of an inch. And then for the width, I've obviously just measured the opening of the shop door, and my width is 78 millimetres, and that's 3 and 5/64 of an inch, but obviously you'll need to measure the width of your door opening. And obviously I didn't just take the height, because the opening is a lot taller than the actual door. If you remember, we're going to have that little window light at the top. So for both doors I'll use the standard door height, and then whatever's left we'll do our little window decorations in. Okay, so I'm using 2.5mm sheet wood for the base of my door, and I'm going to add embellishments in 1.5mm sheet wood. So the 2.5mm sheet wood, or 3/32 of an inch, and then I'll be using 1/16 of an inch 1.5mm sheet wood for the embellishments. But let's start with the actual sort of base of the door. And I'm just basically going to glue these two vertical supports here between these two horizontal pieces. And I had a play around with the design of the door, and if you remember when we looked at my drawing, I was going to do the base of this door as high as the base of the window frames that I made. But when I actually measured it out that way, it would have looked rather bulky. There would have been too much door at the bottom and a smaller glass area, or glazed area, and I want this sort of lovely big glazed window again so that we can see inside. So I'm just gluing those to the base part. Yeah, so I made this bit at the bottom a lot smaller, or shorter I should say, but I will sort of copy the decoration with those panels in the bottom part. So pull those two top parts down, and so that you've got nice flush edges, so that you make a nice square door frame. And the mouldings that I'm going to be adding will also add support to this door. So the overall depth of the door will be 4mm. That's sort of 3/16 of an inch, so we'll have a nice heavy looking door. And those doors that actually came off of the shop were really thick. I think they were about 8mm thick, and they were quite short as well, so they looked a little bit well, dumpy really. Okay, so I'm just going to slide that along my work surface and leave that to dry, and then we'll come back and add those mouldings. But first of all, I just want to show you the handles that I'm going to be using for the shop door, and we're nowhere near ready to attach these yet, but I just wanted to show you, and I really love these, and you may have even seen them in my Etsy shop. But unfortunately I can't get these anymore. I'm no longer dealing with that particular supplier. But I do know somebody else that sells them, so I'll try and get hold of some. And this is an antique brass, lovely big handle. It's got a keyhole in there as well, really nice little detail. And I'll use both of these on this main shop door. And then for the street door we'll find a big sort of antique brass door knob. Right, so I'll go and put these safely in our little box of bits. Pop those in there. I don't know if these will all go in here, but the batteries and the little outside lantern. And then I got 5 more of these little spotlights. So I've got 6 altogether, and maybe I'm thinking now I should have got more, but I can always order more. I was thinking of having 3 in the upstairs shop and 3 downstairs, but because they're quite small I might need 4 on each floor, and then I was going to get them for the little entrance hall and landing as well, so I will order some more of those. So I'll just see if I can get those in here as well. Keep everything together. I think we might need a new box. And I also ordered the vinyl for the shop signage, so this lovely sort of antique gold, and as you can see there with the light on it, it's not that bright sort of shiny gloss gold. I thought that would look a bit too bright and new, so I've gone for this sort of satin finish, and I think that will look really nice. So we'll use that for the name of the shop and for the number 33 in the little doorway. So the base of the door is now dry, and that's ready to attach the mouldings to. And I've just laid the mouldings out here, how they will attach to the door. So as you can see, I'm just going to be building it up So I've built another sort of frame there, and then I've made all of these little embellishments which will go on there to cover joins and to make it look nice really. Now the frame here is just 7mm wide, and the frame that I've made from the 1.5 sheet wood is 9mm wide, so 2mm wider, and that will be the case all the way round. And then on the inside of the door we'll have that little 2mm lip which the acetate will sit inside, and then once the door is painted we can add the acetate and then make further mouldings to attach to the back to hide the acetate join. So that's sort of how I'm going to be putting it all together. So I'll start by putting this top moulding into place. Glue's going a little bit claggy, and it's 3:30 now and there's no sign of thunderstorms or rain or wind. It's just as muggy out there as it was earlier. I'm just putting that into place so it's flush along the top there. Let me grab that piece of spare strip wood again. Use that just to push that into place. And I like doing things like this because you can really be adventurous with things like doors. So you don't have to do as I've done here with my mouldings. You might want to do something slightly different, but hopefully this will just give you the sort of basic idea of how to build a door up. And if I just show you then with that first part, so if you look from behind, I've got that little lip in there, and that will be the case all around this opening, and our acetate will sit in there, and then we can put mouldings on the back of the door as well, probably not quite as elaborate as these. We'll probably just have a flat panel along the bottom, but just to hold in that piece of acetate and so that you then can't see the sides of it. And that's basically what we're doing with the windows as well, by putting that beading in. I think I need to put some more glue on there. That will then go down this side. Again, I want a nice flush edge along there. Use that again to push that into place at the top there. And I've actually made this as wide as the opening because we're going to be rounding off one long edge. That will then take away a tiny bit from the width, so then that will make it fit nicely and open and close smoothly. And the bit I'm really looking forward to now is adding the paint to the window frame and the doors once they're all constructed. I just think it's that stage where you really start seeing, you know, the results of your work, of what you're doing. And I think those antique brass handles are going to look lovely against that deep blue as well. So this piece that sits across here, again I want to overlap by 2mm at the back there. So I'm just going to do that by eye. Let me turn that over, just have a look from the back. Make sure that that's straight. Looks about right. This one will sit along the bottom. Now that vertical moulding at the side there is sitting a little bit lower than the bottom of the door, so I don't want to line it up with that. I just want to line it up with the bottom of the actual door. And then I can actually cut that bit off, cut that about 1 millimetre too long there. Make sure that bit's straight. I can sand along the bottom of the door then to make sure it's completely flush. And I actually had to stop filming for a while because there's builders over the road and down a bit digging up somebody's drive, and they were using some sort of drill and it was making such a high-pitched whistle. Really awful sound. So that sort of set me back a little bit. Okay, so before I add these further embellishments, I actually want to clamp this piece together and then I can sand it flat. So I don't want to add the embellishments yet because obviously I don't want to sand it with those on. So I'll just grab some clamps. And I just really want to clamp it at each join. And put a few in the middle as well. We'll just make sure that it all dries flat. One in there as well. And I'll just put a couple along each of those sides and one at the top as well. And that piece can be left to dry. So the glue on the door has now dried, that's been drying overnight. So I'm going to sand it just so that we've got a nice flat surface, just in case any of these pieces are slightly higher. We're going to sand them all down, and I'm using the block just because if you just use your fingers with your sandpaper then you can tend to sort of apply more pressure in certain areas, so always use a block when you're sanding something flat like this. I just want to show you that rain outside. And after yesterday's heat, that's really welcome. So much cooler today, so much nicer. It's also a good idea at this stage to try your door into place. And then if there's any adjustments, to make them before you add the embellishments and the mouldings. So as you can hear, that's a little bit tight. Very tight along the top there, and I think there's still a little bit of a rounded corner down there. Well, not so much rounded, but a little bit sticking out, so I'll get back in there with the needle file. Now, I don't want to sand too much off, so I could just sand a little bit now off each side, but we are actually going to be rounding one edge for the pin hinge, which helps the door to open and close smoothly. So I think that will take away enough to take away this tightness. See how tight that is in there? And I think it's actually the door frame, so I've measured it, obviously I think across the bottom, and at the top it does get a little bit narrow, and I don't know if you can see on camera, can you see how it just curves in a little bit towards the top? Which is fine because you just need to make the adjustments obviously to fit your door frame, and because it's such a small amount that it curves in by, it's not going to be noticeable, so you don't have to do lots of work to put it straight, but you would then just make the door to fit. So I think I'm going to go ahead and fit the embellishments, and then once we've rounded off that edge we'll see if we need to make any further adjustments, and if so I could just take a tiny little slice off this side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fit the embellishments, but just to say I quite like how that looks so far. Okay, so I also want to shape the mouldings before I attach them. So with these two that are going at the top there, I just want to bevel the bottom edge of each piece. And it just adds another little bit of detail and makes it look more finished. I never just like attaching a square piece of wood. So I'm just rubbing it along my sandpaper, or sweeping it along, 45-degree angle, just to create that little bevel at the bottom there. So that's that one. Do the same with this one. use a piece of 500 just to tidy that up. Oops. That will go there. And what these are doing as well is covering the joins, but also adding further strength to the door. So we're going to have a nice big solid chunky door, which I like for shop doors. So again, you want to make sure you've got nice flush edges, so along the side and the top. So I'm just going to place that there, and then I'll grab that strip wood and just use that to press against the side like that. And make sure that's nice and flush there. Don't want anything overhanging. And I'll secure these all with clamps again once I've done them. I'm going to do these two little panels in the bottom there, and again I'm going to bevel these on all edges. And then I just want to find a couple of small bits of strip to use as spacers, because I've left 5mm around each edge, so that one will go at the top there. And this is just a little drawer out of my drawer unit at the side of my desk, and I always just keep all of these smaller pieces of strip, a couple there for my spares, and then, you know, they come in handy for some projects. You might find that you've got pieces long enough to make legs from, so they're always worth keeping. Put those to one side for a moment, and I'm going to just bevel these in the same way as I did for those top mouldings. I don't know about you, but I normally count the number of sweeps I do. Because then you get more even bevel. Okay, so I've got my spacers in place there. Apply a bit of glue. And I want to place it as well so that the grain runs from the top to bottom, and I'll do the same with the other one. And it might seem picky, but it is noticeable when you've got pieces side by side, and the paint will take differently on them as well. Or, you know, when they're painted, you'll be able to tell that the grain's running in a different direction. So always just double check. And if your spacing, you know, isn't the width of a piece of strip wood, you can always just cut a little piece of wood to the size that you need and make a couple of spacers. You don't have to use strip. And I'm actually going to start clamping those down before I just shape these little corner pieces that I've got left to go here on these corners. Otherwise that's going to lift and then I won't be able to get it flat again. And I can just whip these clamps off, attach the final mouldings and then pop the clamps back on. I was going to try and get away with using one across the two there, but didn't quite reach. I'll get another two on the inside there. And I want to put some on the top mouldings as well at the same time. A couple on there as well. Okay, so I'll put that to one side, shape the final mouldings, and then we can attach them. Okay, so I'm going to glue these into place now, and these I actually want the grain to go across so that they're sort of running on from these horizontal mouldings at the top and bottom of that bottom section. And again, I just beveled each edge of each of these. And you can be elaborate as you like with these mouldings. You know, you could put another one on top. Depending on the sort of shop you have. I really like doing things like this, building pieces up. You know, and you could, if you haven't got any doors on it, you could just go out and buy doors, but I'd much rather make my own. Oops, I've got the grain the wrong way round. And I hope that when you see how easy it can be, that you'll have a go at making your own doors as well. You can pay quite a lot for doors nowadays, and I've probably made this for less than the price of one piece of wood. So do have a think about that. And it's that thing as well, isn't it, of being able to say, you know, you did everything you can see here I made. Okay, so just remove any excess glue, and I will sand again once these are all dry. And I'm going to put all of these clamps back on, and I've got 4 extra ones to put on those little mouldings that I've just attached. And the first ones are probably more or less dry by now, but I just want to put them all back on, make sure I've got a nice flat door. Okay, so I'll leave this to dry for a bit longer. I'm going to bring the main door back in, and we can carry on with those window frames. So the vertical parts of the frames have now completely dried, left those drying overnight. And now I want to start on the horizontal pieces at the top and bottom of each window. So this time I'll just be measuring between the strip wood that I've just attached, and again using my mitre block and saw to cut the strips. So that's all of those cut. I'm going to attach these as well. And they were all pretty much the same length, just in the far end one of them was just 0.5 millimetre shorter. So that was nice and easy. I'm just going to take hold of that with my tweezers, because I also just want to apply a little bit of glue at each end. That, and then slot that into place level with those. To make sure you've got a nice square frame. I'm just going to lift that up so I can push it up from behind. And that one was a bit of a tight fit, but I left it because I prefer it to be tighter than to be any gap in. Like that. And then move on to the next one. So the horizontal frames are also now attached, and again I've used a little bit of masking tape just to hold those in place while the glue dries. So I've also cut the pieces here for the street door, and I've used 2.5mm sheet for the base of the door, so 3/32 of an inch, and then I've built it up in the same way using mouldings. And the side pieces I've cut 9mm or 3/8 of an inch wide, the same as I did for the side pieces of the shop door, and that just keeps things consistent, and that will be nicer on the eye as well when these are in position. And then I've just sort of built it up, a thinner strip at the top there, enclosing those two smaller panels, and then I've used a 15mm thick strip here and at the bottom here, and that's because I then want to fit the letterbox on there. Now I haven't actually got the letterbox, but what I'll look for is just a fixed letterbox rather than a working one. With a working one I'd then need to cut a hole to actually install it, so I'll just get a fixed one and hopefully be able to get a back plate to go on the other side of the door, and that way I can paint this door and fit it before I've actually got the letterbox, and then we can just pop that on once it comes. And I really never thought about the letterbox, to be honest with you, so I'll get one of those ordered. And then here down the middle as well I've got the 7.5mm thick strip, the same as these horizontal ones, just to sort of keep it to more of a pattern. And then these are 20mm or just over 3/4 of an inch wide, and I've kept all of those the same width as well. And again I've beveled the edges of each piece, and I've done it so that I've got a 3mm border around each edge in each of these panels. So I'm going to attach those now. Just wanted to show you zoom in a bit. There's a family of 3, a male, a female, and a baby. And they come in and eat the birdseed. So that's one side of the door done. I've got plenty of clamps on there, as you can see. So that's going to dry all nice and flat, and then once that's completely dry I'll turn it over and do the other side. So that's both sides now panelled, so I'm going to leave that to dry now, and I want to finish the window frames, so let's do that now. So the next piece of frame on each of these windows will sit across there like that, and then we'll have those 2 smaller panes in there, so this will be divided into 3, and I'm going to do that the same on each of the windows. So I've just gone along and made a little pencil mark 25mm from this top support, so that the actual smaller windows will be 25mm high or 1 inch high, and I've done that on each of the frames, and then I can sit the next piece of strip just below those pencil lines. So it doesn't matter if you sit it below or above, but just make sure you do the same thing on each window. So let's get some more pieces of strip cut. So those horizontal strips are now all glued into place, and I made sure I had a nice tight fit so they just sort of went in and held on their own, and that's what you want to aim for, because then you won't have any gap in at all. And now I've cut each of the smaller panes or pane dividers, and they too hold themselves into place. So I now need to just make some pencil marks on these frames to divide this by 3. So the width of the opening is 71mm. So if I deduct from that the width of the 2 strips together, so 6mm, that's 65. So that doesn't divide exactly by 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the outer 2 panes at 21.5mm, and then the central pane will just be slightly wider by 0.5 millimetre. So I'll do, oops, can't quite get the rule lined up in there. So 21.5 there, and at the top as well. and then the same from the other side. And then the strips will sit on the insides of those pencil marks. Let's glue those into place first. And the windows that were originally in were a little bit chunky, and I think these will look far more elegant by using the slightly thinner strip. Let's do this one as well, just making sure that that's sitting flush as well. You don't want them to be angled at all. And because it's just a tiny amount wider in the middle, it's not going to be noticeable, so it will just look like 3 identically sized panes from a distance, or from the front really. Okay, so I'll complete the other windows and then we can move on to the doors. Okay, so those upper frames are now fitted as well. Really pleased with how they look. So I'm going to start with the street door, and once I removed the clamps I sanded it down on my sandpaper like that in small circular motions on both sides, and then I've chosen what I think is the nicest side to go actually at the front. So I've just put a little B on the back there so I can remember which side I want facing forwards, and let me just show you how that fits into the opening. And I also put the front window frames on. Let me show you that with the shop door in as well. So let me slot that in there. That's quite a nice fit in there. And then let me pop the shop door in as well. I can never resist having a little play before it's time to sort of put things into place. And that's a little bit tight, but once we round that off we'll adjust the other side. But I just wanted to show you how that looked. I think that looks really nice, and I really can't wait to get the paint on. Okay, so let's get that door back out of there. So I just want to gently round off this left-hand edge. Now, because it's quite a thick door, because we've got 3 layers there, so the actual overall width is 5.5 millimeters. I just want to round off the edges rather than making it a complete sort of rounded side, if you know what I mean, because that would take quite a bit of sanding, and I don't want to take away from the width of the door. But by just rounding off these edges and just of the mouldings, that will allow the door to open and close smoothly. So I've got my 180 sandpaper here, just had to check that, and I'm just going to sweep the door towards me, bringing it into an upright position. And if you find that you can't support the sandpaper, because obviously you need a larger piece for this, then you can actually use a strip of masking tape along it like that, and then use both hands to round it off. So as you can see there, that's just starting to round. And just check that it's even all the way along, because you may have been putting more pressure on one area, and I've got more of a rounded edge at the top. So I'm just going to now pay attention to this bottom part here. Yeah, and that's now evenly rounded. So I'll do the underside of the door now, or the back side of the door. Yep, that's nice and evenly rounded now. And then I'm going to use a piece of fine grade sandpaper and just tidy that up. I'm just sort of sweeping it along at a 45-degree angle. And that just really neatens it off, gets rid of any rough edges. and without taking anything further from the width. Okay, so let's try that into place again. So that's a really nice fit now. So I'm just going to leave that there for a moment and work on the shop door. And again, I'll begin by rounding off that left-hand edge of the door. It's just starting to round over. Quite difficult to hold on to because of the frame. I'm a little bit fragile still at this stage, so don't go too hard with it. You see along there that that's beginning to round off, and then I'll do the other side as well. It's actually even more difficult to get hold of this way. Yeah, that's rounded over quite nicely. So again, I'll just tidy this off in my hand. Okay, moment of truth. Let's try this one into position. Sorry again for sort of whizzing you around on the chair. Okay, so that is still rather tight. So I don't want to round any more off now, but I'm going to just sand a little bit off this side. And because I've rounded that side and have probably shaved off, I don't know, 1/4 to 1/2 millimetre, sanding this side isn't going to make it look odd. If you see those little embellishments there have sort of been rounded over, so by sanding along here it will just make them match. Okay, so let's sand that straight edge. It really isn't much that I want to take off, as we sort of spoke of before. I don't want too much gap in. Okay, so I'm just holding it upright. And then what I'm going to do is try it in place again. Come with me if you will. And I just noticed the battery light has started flashing, so I'll change the battery now. So that's a little bit of a better fit, certainly at the bottom there, but still too tight at the top. It's probably from about 3/4 of the way up. So a little bit more off overall, and then I'll just do a little bit more at the top. But the light's flashing angrily now, so let me change the battery. So just 10 sweeps and I'll give it another try. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so still too tight, especially along the top, so I'm just going to do some sweeps along this top bit. Try that. And I think it's actually where the frame is not level rather than the actual door. Can you hear that squeaking? That's because it's still a little bit too tight. It feels like it's getting tighter actually. Quick, get it out then. Do a couple of overall sweeps as well, and this is how you should do it. Just keep coming back, a few sweeps, try it again, a few more sweeps. Don't be tempted just to sand loads off, because then you'll go back and you would have done too much, and of course then you can't put it back on, but at least you can keep taking a little bit more off. I've got a good feeling this time, so I'll take you with me again. . . feel too tight. Although I think it is just that top corner, to be honest. I think that's quite a nice fit. If I sort of go in at the front angle, it's just got a nice little gap around the edge. So let me concentrate on that, and then I'll come back to you once I've got a nice fit, but I will just keep taking off a little bit at a time, trying it again until we get that fit right. So back in a min. So that's now quite a nice fit, but that did take quite a bit of extra sanding. And then as I was just checking to make sure that the door opened to the inside, I actually chipped a bit of the moulding at the top there. So what I did was just put a little bit of glue underneath. I'm trying to sort of zoom in to see if I can show you. So I just cracked this moulding along here. So I put some glue carefully underneath, and then I used a really strong clamp to hold that together and left it to dry. So that was a little bit annoying, but I don't think you can even see the join now. So that's good. But what I want to do now is actually drill the holes into the top and bottom of the rounded side of the door. So I actually want to drill the hole into the sheet wood and not between the mouldings, because that will split them apart from the wood. And I want to go in probably, I don't know, 2.5 millimeters, so 3/32 of an inch from the rounded edge of the door. So I'll drill my hole there, and the same at the bottom. And I'm not measuring, I'm just doing it by eye, because we are actually going to be making the holes in the top and bottom of the door surround based on these marks. So once we've drilled the holes, we'll pop a little pin in, and then we can make marks on the door surround and get an exact positioning for the holes. So let me just attach the vise to the edge of my desk. Okay, so I've secured the vise onto the edge of my desk, and I've got a piece of folded kitchen towel in there, and that's just that when you're using soft wood, the jaws of the vise can actually mark the wood. So always just fold a little piece of kitchen towel in there. So let me pop the door in, secure that in there. Now, because it's tall, I'm still going to be careful with it. That's solid enough that I can now drill the hole. So I've got a 0.75mm bit in my drill, and that's wide enough to take a dressmaking pin, which I'm using for the hinges. So keep the drill as upright as you can, and I'm trying to support the door with my finger, although it is still moving. And I probably want to go down by about 1/4 inch. That'll be about half of the drill bit that's showing. And then you can test how far down you've gone by actually using one of your pins I've got here. And just pop that into the hole. Put your thumbnail at the top and then bring that out. And that's plenty, so I've probably gone down by about 3/8 of an inch there, so that's enough. And then take that out, and I actually want to clamp the jaws onto the sort of bit across the top of the door. And then drill down again. Just try that again. Yep, that's fine. So now I can do the same with the other door. And I've already made the pencil marks on there. That's an awful squeak, isn't it? Really sort of sets your teeth on edge. And the same with this one. So I've just popped both doors back into position. And I don't know if you can see on camera, but I've just made a little pencil mark at either side, just above the top of the door. So obviously we want to allow the door to open, so I don't want it too tight, and that's where I'll measure for the top of the door surround. And it's a good idea to do that because you want to be measuring in the exact place, just in case your frames aren't quite square all the way down, as we know this one isn't. And I've done the same with the street door. Pencil mark there at either side. Now I did say earlier that I didn't have any 9mm strip wood, but I did actually find a piece which is 12 by 3. So 1/2 inch by 1/8 of an inch, and I've cut that down to 9mm or 3/8 of an inch, which is the depth of the door surround that's already in place. So I'll use this for the strip that goes along just above the door. So let me take my measurement and cut that to size. So I've cut that so it's in there nice and tightly, and then the plan is that I'll glue a piece of 6 by 3 along the front edge of it, like that, and that will then create that lip at the back for the acetate to sit in. And then I'll use 6 by 3 all around the front edge of the frame here, again to create the little frame for our window acetate. But first of all, I'm going to take this out and glue those two pieces together. So I've glued each of those strips together, so the 6 by 3 onto the 9 by 3, and whilst they're drying I want to put the pins into the bottom of the doors. Just put that in there like that. Gently push it down so it's in as far as it will go. The same in the street door. And then I'm going to take my pliers and I want to trim that to about, I don't know, 5mm say. Like that. Same with that one. And then I'm going to put the door into position, and we're going to use that pin to make a little mark in the attached door frame and then drill our hole. So let's pop back over to the shop. Okay, so if I just line this up where it will go, and I want it so it's sitting right towards the front of the frame there. I'm just making sure it's lined up before I press down. And I'm just gently pressing down. That, and then that pin should have made a tiny little mark in there which I can just about see, so I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper. I don't want to press too hard because I don't want it to go disappearing right into the door. If I just bring in another pin here, just making the mark a little bit deeper. I am going to drill in, but I'm just making sure that that hole is in the right place. I can then use that little mark to drill my hole, and again I'm using the 0.75mm bit. Again, I want to go down by about 1/4 of an inch. And I can test that in the same way. And I need to go down a little bit further. Yep, that's better. And then we can do that same thing again with the street door. Make more of an indentation there. And then I can drill my hole. try the pin in again, make sure we've gone down far enough. Oops, can't get it out. I'll have to use my pliers, I think. So yeah, got in plenty there. So I now want to make the hole in the top surround by doing the same thing again. So I've put a pin in the top of the door, and that will actually sit in the door opening like that. So we've got that ridge along the back there at the top. So my door will go in there. I'm obviously going to put it down my worktop like that, and then line up the door at the front. Just use that piece of strip to make sure I've got a flush edge along there, and then just push gently to make a little indentation with the pin. And then I want to drill this hole all the way through. So I'm just going to do it on my worktop and support the piece with my hand. The reason I want to go all the way through is because I can then poke the pin through the top of this surround and into the top of the door. So once it starts spinning, you know you're through. Like that. And then once that's in place, the top of the door will sit in there like that. So we can now glue this piece into place in the door opening. So I'm just positioning it first of all above those little pencil lines that I made. And then I should just pop the door into place and just manoeuvre it so it's sitting exactly right. So I haven't got pins in the door, I'm just popping it into place. Like that. And then I don't want there to be too much gap in at the top, so I'm just going to come down a little bit on that side. Can you see me okay from there? I'm just sort of getting down level with it and having a look. I think still to come down a tiny bit. Again, we don't want to come down too much and be sitting right on top of the door, because we still want it to open and close smoothly. And I think that's about right. Be down a touch there. I say it's right, and then I still change it. Yeah, so let me show you that from the front then. So not too much gapping, just a nice very thin gap all the way around, which is what we want to ensure that it will open and close smoothly. So now I'll do the same with the street door. This one is actually even tighter than the shop door. Just get that level with the pencil marks, make sure it's flush against the front edge. And then bring the door in. That's still got the pin in the top. I just need to get my hand behind there so I can manoeuvre the door into position. That's not bad actually. I think I just need to come down a touch there. So that's a nice fit as well. Just got a nice even gap all around the outside. And one thing I hadn't actually thought of was that I am now not going to be able to build the remaining bits of frame until we've actually painted everything and fitted the doors. But that's okay, because we can just cut the strips we need then, paint and glue them into place once this has all been painted. It won't really make too much difference, but I wasn't thinking of that. Otherwise I could have actually drilled the hole all the way through at the bottom, and then it wouldn't have mattered. We could have still done that frame, popped the top pin of the door in first, lined it up, and then put a pin in that hole down there. But it doesn't matter, it's not too much of a problem. It's just, again, not thinking about what order I should have actually done things in. But now we can actually start the bit I've been looking forward to all day, the painting. So I'll go and find my blue paint and then we'll get started. Okay, so I've got my door on my plastic tablecloth again, and since the last episode I've actually ordered some more of this navy blue. I got about another 4 pots, so I'll have plenty of paint. And the beauty of this is that I don't have to be too careful going around the edges, because everything will be covered, all of the edges will be covered with the brick paper. So I can just have real fun now just painting all of the blue parts. And most of it will be blue, obviously all the frames. I'll leave the steps for now because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I spoke about tiling them, but that's going to cause a bit of a ridge now, which I haven't catered for, so I probably won't be able to do that. Might just use a stone coating paint on those, that sort of sand-filled paint. But yeah, definitely all of the frames, name plaque along here will be blue, and I want to do the frames on the inside in the navy as well. And then the back wall I'll probably just use a neutral cream or something like that, but certainly all the frames on the inside will be in the navy. Okay, let me find a nice brush and I'll get started. And another thing I've done just before I start is to put pins into each of those drilled holes, just so that the holes don't get bunged up with paint. So that's one good coat on the front and back of the piece, and it's now 5 o'clock on Friday, so I'm going to leave this to dry over the weekend. I might do a little bit of work at the weekend if I get the time, but otherwise I'll come back to this on Monday, sand that back and then do another coat and then see how the finish is. But I'll be doing the same as I did with the front window frames and applying a coat of clear varnish once we've got a good coverage on there. But got quite a bit done today, and I'm really pleased with how that front panel is looking. Okay, so have a lovely weekend and I'll see you again Monday. So I had hoped to get a little bit done at the weekend, but it turned out I wasn't able to. And it's now actually Wednesday, so I'm just coming back to it now. And that's just the way things happen sometimes. I'm sure you know that when you're trying to sort of get a bit of time to work on your own projects. And it's just been really busy in the Etsy shop, which is really good. But packing does take up quite a bit of time. But I'm back to it now, and I'm hoping to spend quite a bit of time on it today. It's now 20 past 10, and the first thing I want to do is paint the doors. So I'll be using my slightly smaller paintbrush for these, my number 6 brush, and that's just so that I can get into all those little gaps around the mouldings. And I've just got a couple of spare pots of paint here to rest them on once I've done the first coat. Then I can put them to one side to dry and get back to the main door of the shop. So let's give the paint a shake and a stir. So that's the first coat applied to both sides of the doors. And when I do the first coat, I really just put it on quite haphazardly. Although I try and cover all of the wood and get into all of the nooks and crannies, you can see that I've applied more in certain areas. Some areas are a bit thin, but I don't worry about that on this first coat. And then once that's completely dried, I go through and give it a really good sand. So a really sort of hard sand, and then I'll apply another 2 or even 3 coats. If I was using a lighter paint, I probably wouldn't do that. But with a darker paint, and I want that particularly sort of rich colour, I will probably do, well, certainly 2, but probably 3 coats. The other thing I wanted to point out as well is that where you can still see that wood, it's not that I've missed painting over it, it is the glue residue from underneath the panels there. And this is what I quite often say to you: remove as much glue as you can as you're going along, and then sand as well. And although I did sand, I've obviously missed quite a few areas. There's even like a little dribble of glue there, which I've obviously just spilt from the end of my cocktail stick and didn't even realise it. But when we do that quite harsh sand back, once this is completely dried, we should be able to remove most of that. And then subsequent coats and sands will hopefully cover all of that. Okay, so it's just gone 11 o'clock, so I'm going to go and make a cup of tea, and then I'll bring the main front door back onto my desk and we'll give that a good sand back. And with this there are some patchy areas, and that's because there was still paint on some of these surrounds. Now, a lady did put in the comments about using a primer which is called 4-in-1. Now, I didn't have any primer, and me being me, I just wanted to rush and get on with it. But I would recommend, I think primers are really good for preparing your surfaces before you start. And certainly if this had been new and had just been the plain wood, I would have used a primer. But my thinking was that because it already had a coat of paint on it, that I would be okay. But had I have used a sort of 4-in-1 primer or any sort of wood primer, I would have got a better finish on there. But we'll be sanding this back as well, again quite hard, and doing those 2 or 3 coats. So thank you again to Kobe, who recommended a primer. You are completely right, but if you don't have anything like that, you can still get a good finish by sanding and applying more coats.